Last night we had over 48,000 people getting tested for COVID. We have to keep that number high. It's so important given we had 77 cases of community transmission. Now, out of these 77 cases, there are two facts I want to highlight. Firstly, that 33 of those have been exposed in the community whilst infectious. But more importantly, in terms of the critical message today, over 50 of the 77 are close family members of those who've been infected. So I want to repeat the message I conveyed yesterday, that when you get COVID, unfortunately, those most impacted are those closest to you. And tragically, we've seen one older person die, and I want to extend my deepest condolences to their families and loved ones. And Dr. Chant will provide further details, and regrettably that person did acquire it within the household or within the home setting. So I can't stress enough that every time we risk breaking the rules or even just going about our business and not getting tested when we need to, the people whose lives and health that we're risking the most are those closest to us. It's quite stark and telling that more than 50 out of the 77 cases overnight were close family members of the person who had the virus. And regrettably, that trend will continue. And given the number of people exposed in the community overnight, I'm anticipating the numbers in New South Wales will be greater than 100 tomorrow. Now, that's what I'm anticipating, and I'll be shocked if it's less than 100 this time tomorrow of additional new cases. So we can't stress enough the importance of not only following the rules, but also realising the risk that the people who will suffer the most is, if you don't worry about yourself, that's fine, even though it's affecting people of all age groups. If you don't worry about yourself, that's your decision. But think about your closest family members, your closest people in your life. They're the people that are most impacted. Dr. Chan in her report would also highlight the fact that the other category that we're concerned about are essential workers like tradies who are visiting multiple sites. We really need people who visit multiple sites for essential work, whether you're an electrician or whether you're fixing essential services for people within homes or within construction sites. We recommend strongly that you get tested immediately before you continue working, and Dr. Chant will speak more about that. But it's really, really important to assume that when you're leaving your home, given the numbers are where they are, it's really important to assume that you have the virus or anyone you're interacting with has the virus. Now, on a positive, I want to thank people for staying at home. Reports back from police and other community leaders is quite evident that people are taking the stay-at-home message. And no doubt, the cases that we're learning about today are quite historic, going back 5, 6 or 7 days. Having said that, it's really important for us from here on in to maintain the stay at home. Do not leave your home unless you absolutely have to. I can't stress that strongly enough. And when I say do not leave your home, we mean your home. We mean don't visit a relative, a close friend, a grandparent, because unfortunately that's how the disease is spreading, through close family. And we need to change that trend. Unfortunately, the majority of cases are again in southwestern Sydney, and that's where the accumulation of cases is. But we anticipated that, because when you have a number infectious within a community, those unfortunately infectious ones are likely to go home, and then unfortunately their direct family members in that household are likely to get the virus, given how transmissible this is. So I can't stress enough the importance of everybody doing the right thing. And of course, we know that in many cases, what's occurring is unintentional. But that's why everybody has to think about every step they take outside their home. If you need to pick up an essential good or essential services, please think about, plan this out before you leave the home to make sure you have minimal contact with anybody. You have to assume you have the virus or somebody you're in contact with has the virus. But I do want to thank the community for responding to our stay-at-home orders. We've noticed in the last week, but in particular the last few days, a noticeable drop in people being out and about, and that is a good thing. If we're going to get out of this in a reasonable time frame, we need everybody to please stay at home. If you need anything, you can contact various agencies, but Service New South Wales or any other hotline that we have to get the support you need. But please, we are at a critical point. I know I keep saying this, but it's the truth. And I know I keep saying the importance of not leaving your home, but the statistics are really, unfortunately, playing out the way we anticipated in terms of those infected with the virus taking it home to their closest loved ones. And that's what we need to see reversed. I'll now ask Dr. Chant to give her update. Deputy Commissioner Worboy will talk about compliance. And again, I want to stress thank you to the vast majority of people in our state, especially in the Greater Sydney area, for doing the right thing. It's been noticed. But we need to keep that up. We need to maintain that level of vigilance to start seeing things change. But again, I fear that tomorrow and the few days afterwards will be worse, much worse than what we've seen today. But what we need to be assured of is that the tide will turn once the impact of the changes we've made come to fruition. I'll now ask Dr. Chant to give her update.
Thank you, Premier. So New South Wales recorded 77 locally acquired cases of COVID in the 24 hours to 8 p.m. last night. And as the Premier has indicated, over 50 of these cases were family. And this highlights the critical point around the importance of not putting yourself or your loved ones or your family and friends at risk. Please stay at home, and that means staying within the one household. Do not leave that household setting and do not interact with other family members. And I know that that can be a difficult concept given the closeness of family units. But at this point in time, in responding to COVID, we need to keep the households as a discrete unit so we don't get that risk of further spread. I'd also just like to highlight that just because you've had a negative test on one day doesn't mean that you've not infected. And that's why every time you leave the house, you've got to go about your business in a very safe way. Interestingly, we've brought in some close contacts. They didn't have symptoms, and we're really genuinely surprised that they were positive. And so again, please remember, you can be infectious if you don't have symptoms. We are also requesting anyone in the community to please, if you've got the most minimal of symptoms, please get tested. And while our focus is on southwestern Sydney, we can't not also keep a very strong gaze on other parts of greater metropolitan Sydney. So it is important across the state to continue to come out for testing, and it was pleasing to see that we had 48,754 tests reported to 8 p.m. last night. Tragically, there was the death that the Premier referred to of a 90-year-old lady, and my condolences to the family. And again, it highlights the severity and the impact that COVID can have on loved ones, the most nearest and dearest to you. We're also asking that workplaces continue to put in those COVID-safe practices and ensure that they keep their workers safe. So of the 79 locally acquired cases, 77 locally acquired cases, the vast majority continue to be from southwestern Sydney. Some are from Sydney Local Health District and the remainder from southeastern Local Health District. And we need to maintain that vigilance, not just on southwestern Sydney. But I need to give frank advice that the case numbers in southwestern Sydney are extraordinarily high. We know transmission is going through households, from household to household, and impacting on other close friends and work colleagues. So it is critical, and can I thank the community for the response. It's been so pleasing that when they're contacted by public health or they've heard the messages, they've presented for testing. We need to get ahead of the spread. So at the moment, we're finding, by the time we find the cases, their households are already infected. And therefore we keep on getting people infectious in the community. What we need to do is ensure that we've stopped that chains of transmission so that we've found all the cases, contained their contacts, so that there's no people infectious in community. So that indicator we've talked about infectious in the community, we want to see that turn around as quickly as possible. And it's really important that everyone plays their part. So thank you to the communities across New South Wales, but a particular thank you to Southwestern Sydney communities for their wonderful response and their cooperation with public health in getting their friends and family members tested promptly. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Chant, Premier, Minister. 106 infringement notices issued in the last 24 hours right across not just Greater Sydney but out into country New South Wales as well. 6 of those notices went to people around Orange and also 8 of those notices to King's Cross and out to Penrith and also in southwest Sydney. So the spread of the infringement notices is right across the state, which is disappointing. What I do know is that people continue, again, right across the state to ring Crime Stoppers to report people who are going outside of the order. Over 1,200 messages put on the police system for police to attend locations to investigate where there might be a noise complaint or more cars than usual or people walking in to a premises. One of those instances was a unit at Marrickville where police responded to information. They went to that unit and found 15 men in a small unit playing cards. These men were in their 50s through to just short of 90 years of age, no masks, no social distancing, clearly in an environment that was a huge risk to them, their families and their community. Police issued infringement notices and will follow up and make sure that each and every person that was there playing cards is dealt with appropriately. The message out of this, though, is we spoke before about communication with people in southwest Sydney. It's incumbent on everyone to make sure that people in their family, their friends, that may have difficulty with language or difficulty with the context of where we're at the moment, to explain to them that they simply need to stay at home for this while until such times as the risk has moved. Another incident that I'd like to highlight is in the Auburn area, where police again were called to a premises near Sydney Olympic Park where an 18-year-old birthday party continued. There were 10 people at this party, clearly organised. They turned up, they were aware of the public health orders, and police took action in terms of infringement notices to each of those people and closed the party down, and they were directed to return home. The third incident that I would highlight is one in a garage under a set of units in the Marylands area. These were young people that were playing PlayStation. Again, noise of that gathering was reported to police. Police went along, knocked on the garage door, and here were the people sitting outside the public health order, quite clearly and aware of their obligations. They were issued infringement notices and they were told to go back home. These are 3 very different but still very much the same in terms of people making a conscious decision to not stay at home, to leave their home, to go to a premises for an organised gathering and not comply with the public health order. That said, when I talked to police right across this state and indeed southwest Sydney last night, the vast majority of people continue to do the right thing, comply with the public health order. New South Wales Police thank those people, and really we just need to see people take a conscious decision about their actions. If you have to leave home, you have to make sure that you take a moment to make sure that you need, in the first instance, to leave your home, and then if you have to do that in the shortest possible time frame. We've spoken about browsing at shopping centres. People need to make a decision before they leave home what shop they need to go to and what goods they need to acquire. Police have always said that they will be firm but fair, we are now in a position where we need to be much more firmer than fairer. People understand the orders more and more, and police are just getting a little tired of people that disguise their behaviour around the orders to try and get some legitimacy to it. Police will continue to be visible right across the state, and we simply ask people to work with us and do the right thing.
Do you have any information on the vaccination status of this woman in her 90s that passed away? Has received any doses?
I understand that she was unvaccinated, but we will confirm that.
And the Premier said that these cases that we're seeing are all historical, right, dating back 5 days or so, and said that she would expect numbers to go down when the impacts of some of the changes, come into effect. When will we see the impact of the lockdown? It's now about 2 weeks since the 26th. So when will it
I think we've got two things going on here. We've got the overall impact of the lockdown, which means that if there are cases in the community, those people, even if they're not coming forward for testing, may not spread it to others. So that's the general impact of the lockdown, where what you're trying to do is decrease the mobility of the population overall, decrease the opportunities for your interactions, one person to another, and then basically slow the spread of the disease more broadly. What we're observing in southwestern Sydney is really why it's been amplified is because of the close interactions of households. And I think, look, I've spent a lot of my working life in southwestern Sydney, and I appreciate the strengths of the family. It's wonderful to see, but at this time, those close connections between family groups is actually so detrimental to achieving a public health outcome. So what we're finding is that we're having to strengthen the messaging to get it really clear that the family, your household is your family group for this purpose of public health. So whereas if I had have asked you who your direct family is, you might have, many people might have said, well, it's who I live with. In this context, it's wonderful to see in usual times the fact that the family unit is conceived of aunts, uncles, nephews, cousins. That's wonderful. But in COVID times, those interactions between those family groups are so likely to spread COVID. People catching up with their relatives. It is just a recipe for COVID spread in indoor environments. So we're just trying to really convey the urgency and seriousness of this issue. However, I've got to also applaud the community response. I mean, thank you for coming forward for testing. We're trying to get ahead by doing rapid sort of contact tracing to find those rings of transmission. But I really appreciate the community and its response. And whilst our gaze is firmly on southwestern Sydney, I do not want complacency anywhere else. This is we do not want to be putting out multiple bushfire spot fires in other sites. And so there is a responsibility on all of us to do the right thing, follow the health orders. But rather than discussing loopholes to the health orders, I think the principle that I've articulated is if we are going to get out of lockdown, the quickest way we can do that is by all doing the right thing. And really, even if you are diagnosed with COVID and our public health contact tracers interview you, there should be no contacts. You should have basically hardly been out of the house, hardly been in contact with anyone else, and therefore we have confidence that the chain of transmission is really broken.
But when would you expect to see the impacts of the changes from the lockdown, or from what day should we see it go down or admit that it's running away?
So at the moment we are still identifying unrecognised cases within households in southwestern Sydney. So for me, I would be hoping to see a decline in cases outside of that setting, but I think it's going to be a number of days before we turn around, and to some extent we're trying, the numbers might actually increase because we're really ramping up testing to try and get ahead of the transmission curve. So rather than having cases sit out there that are just becoming positive, we want to get them at the earliest time, because if we can get them just when they're becoming positive, they're less infectious at that point, because our tests are quite sensitive. So that's the aim. Can we get people earlier? so we can give that public health advice, make sure that they're not even doing those incidental things. But I would hope our message is clear. One person from the household going out for the most minimum of time and only if it's absolutely essential.
Can I just ask you to get a breakdown on numbers in hospital,
Certainly.
please, and ICU and perhaps ages as well attached to that?
Yes, certainly. I'll just turn to that page and put my glasses on because I'm getting old.
I understand.
And my glasses broke, but that's okay. All right. Okay. Sorry, this will make a very... this is a very serious topic, so please don't be distracted by that. So currently we have 52 patients who have been admitted to hospital, and of these patients there are 15 people in ICU, 5 of whom are ventilated. So again, this is a serious disease, COVID. We cannot afford to have complacency. 23 of the people admitted to hospital at the moment with COVID are under the age of 55. So that dispels the myth that this is only severe for the elderly. And of those, 11 are under the age of 35 and 6 are under the age of 25. Of the 15 people in ICU, 1 is in their teens, 1 is in their 20s, 1 is in their 30s, 1 is in their 40s, 3 are in their 50s, 5 are in their 60s, 2 are in their 70s, and 1 is in their 80s. And on this note, could I also just urge everyone to come forward for their second dose of their AstraZeneca vaccine. Please talk to your GP. We are recommending that whilst the interval was that 3 months at this time, because we are seeing case numbers high, we want to get people to come forward, and you can get vaccinated around that 6 weeks mark. We know that for the Delta variant, you need those 2 doses. So by calling people to get a second dose, we may be sacrificing a bit of long-term protection, but what we're doing is making sure you're protected earlier. And at this time, that is the strategy we would suggest. So please ring your GP if you've got a booking into the future for AstraZeneca and ask them whether it can be brought forward. We particularly want to focus on the elderly. We know the vaccines are very effective at preventing illness and death, and we know the elderly are most vulnerable. So please make that appointment. I know there is access to AstraZeneca in the community through general practice, so please take up those opportunities.
Dr. Chant, are contact tracers overwhelmed as we're seeing cases just go up and up, and will you be looking at expanding the team of contact tracers?
The contact tracers is very much expanded, and what's useful is we're using a network across the network. So we have distributed public health units all the way up throughout the state. And so what's useful at the moment is we can engage contact tracers from Hunter, New England, from Mid-North Coast, Central Coast. And so what we're doing is actually distributing the case interviews across the state. We're then making sure that that information comes back and that the intelligence gathered from that information is led by the Public Health Unit at Southwestern Sydney. And as I'd indicated, we're also trying some new strategies to get people to identify their contacts very early in the case interviews and then go back and get more detail, because obviously our priority at the moment is stopping those chains of transmission.
Just in terms of people in hospital and pressure, especially in southwestern Sydney, of people in hospital, do you think that the hospital system can cope with it in that area, or will people start being moved out of the area?
So we have a fantastic integrated healthcare system. I think that's been one of the strengths. So we'll work to support southwestern Sydney, and some of the patients are distributed already across different sites. A number of the positive cases are transferred for their own, because they're unable to self-isolate, to the Sydney Health Accommodation. So obviously some of that heavy workload is being borne by Sydney Local Health District as well. But we will work to support it. There may need to be some minor operational changes, but we'll update the community on those.
Premier, how close are we to extending this lockdown?
Well, obviously the numbers aren't going in the right direction. That's pretty obvious to everybody. And the number that concerns us the most is the number who've been exposed in the community. So last night we saw 33 people who were diagnosed who had some level of exposure in the community. And that is the number that we need to see go down to as close to zero as possible. We appreciate that those already in isolation who subsequently develop the disease, that's always unfortunate. But in terms of the greater public issue and challenge we have, it's really getting down to as close to zero as possible those people who have been exposed in the community, because that tells us there could still be unknown chains of transmission. And the whole purpose of the lockdown is to stop people moving and to stop those chains of transmission. There are some that are already there, and our health contact tracers are doing a great job of identifying those. But that's why we need everybody to stay at home. If everybody stays put, that means the disease doesn't move further into the community, and that's what we need to prevent through this lockdown.
So we're basically in lockdown indefinitely now until we get that number down, the number of people infected in the community. We're not coming out of this on Friday, are we?
Well, we always have to assess the health advice, but I think it's pretty plain to see that the numbers are not going in the right direction at this point in time, and I want the community to be prepared for that. I've foreshadowed that for a few days. As soon as we have health advice that gives us information on where the numbers are tracking and what we think the future looks like, we'll of course convey that. We always do that. As soon as we know or have a sense of where the data is going, we of course let the community know. But obviously at this point in time, the contact tracers have uncovered a number of chains of transmission, and were it not for the lockdown, it would have been really hard to identify those. But because we know that people are moving in certain communities in a particular way, our contact tracers have been able to stay a step ahead. And that is the whole point of the lockdown.
This lockdown is scheduled to end on Friday. Businesses need a plan. So is your plan to extend the lockdown week by week, or will you come up with, I suppose, a long-term plan to give residents and business owners some certainty?
No, look, that's a great question, and we always want to provide enormous certainty to our community, not just businesses, but for parents, for any individual to be able to plan ahead, and we certainly will provide that advice as soon as we receive it. But I also do want to stress that the length of time of the lockdown is dependent on all of us. If people don't leave home unless they absolutely have to, we'll come out of this sooner rather than later. But that's why I want to leave the door open to the advice we provide. It really depends on how quickly we can turn the numbers around. But given where we're at, and given the lockdown was supposed to be lifted on Friday, I think everybody can tell that it's highly unlikely at this stage, given where the numbers are. And we've always been very upfront about that. I've always said that we need that exposure number in the community, those 33 that we had last night, to be as close to zero as possible, so we're confident that we haven't missed any chains of transmission. And I want to say that even though the focus of new cases is emerging in southwestern Sydney, please know that many people are interacting across the Greater Sydney area through essential things, through essential needs. So don't assume because your suburb isn't listed on concerned venues or cases that you are somehow immune from this. This can affect anybody, anywhere. And please be aware of that. Don't think that because you live outside a particular community. I mean, we've had cases now crop up in certain parts of Greater Sydney because essential workers are moving around. People are moving around on multiple sites, are unfortunately spreading the disease. And we've seen that in areas outside of southwestern Sydney. So this is a situation, a challenge for all of Greater Metropolitan Sydney, including the Central Coast and Shellharbour and Wollongong. Just because you haven't had a case now doesn't mean you won't. And we'd much rather ensure that we prevent that community spread than have other communities go through these number of cases.
You said that home learning would only be for 4 days, and students and teachers, parents would only have to worry about it for 4 days. Do you see it unlikely now that students will go back that first week?
Well,
obviously
we'll await the health advice, but there's no doubt that the challenge for us is limiting mobility. Schools are safe, but what is not safe is having hundreds of thousands of people leaving home at around the same time, dropping kids off, picking kids up. That level of interaction is always a concern for us. So obviously, as a government, our priority would always be to return to face-to-face learning, but only when it's safe for the broader community, and we will obviously take health advice on that. So given mobility is still a challenge for us, Yes, initially we assumed it would potentially be 4 days of home learning, but given where we're at, please allow us to provide that advice closer to the time.
Premier Dominic Perrott there this morning.
What you said around tradies.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the first
Sorry,
part.
on tradies. What's the concern there? And can you just clarify the advice? What are you saying to tradies?
Yeah, the concern we have, and at this stage is a strong recommendation, the concern we have that is if you're a construction worker or a tradie that's visiting multiple sites, unfortunately we have seen a few cases of people being positive but doing essential work at multiple sites. So not so much the larger projects where people tend to be on the same site every day, but unfortunately, we've seen a number of cases in people doing essential work at multiple sites and then spreading the disease through work colleagues, and then those work colleagues going home and spreading it to their loved ones. So we're really recommending that if you are someone who visits multiple sites, that you get tested to make sure you're negative before you continue working. And that's whether you have symptoms or not, because we want to make sure we get ahead of that. So at this stage, that's a strong recommendation. But we know that for essential work, whether you're an electrician or fixing essential things or at essential workplaces, we want to make sure that that doesn't become a possible risk or greater risk to the community. So the advice from health is if you're someone who visits multiple sites, make sure that you don't have any symptoms firstly. Don't leave home if you have any symptoms. That's the first rule for everybody. But if you are someone who works in multiple sites because of your essential work, and that could be aged care workers that we saw a case earlier last week, or it could be a multiple essential workers who work at multiple sites, you are particularly vulnerable in getting the disease and spreading the disease, and therefore we recommend everybody in that category to be tested and be negative before you go to work.
How frequently should they get tested if they're working across multiple sites?
I'll ask Dr. Chant to answer that question.
So obviously at the moment we really want to just keep, we're just looking at the pattern of the cases and what are the issues and challenges that arise. So really we need to just work with the community. I think we're just highlighting the fact that we have seen cases in obviously healthcare workers, aged care workers, but we've also seen some cases in construction workers, and obviously that presents issues for workplaces. We've often had to close down those workplaces and impact on them. We're doing a lot of work with the industry to ensure that they've got COVID-safe practices, and very pleasing to see the response. We've got mask wearing, and the industry is very strong to support that mask wearing as another mitigant, addressing issues like tea rooms and other things which are other congregation spaces. So in terms of the testing, what we're just suggesting is we're telling you that in southwestern Sydney there's a high burden of disease. So if you are particularly from anywhere that you know that there's been some exposure venues or others, please assess your own risk and apply common sense. But we are concerned, we're just raising with the community, we are concerned that some people, by the nature of their jobs, have to go to multiple sites. And obviously that causes a concern, because if you're positive, we've got lots of different sites. And so it is just saying that general advice, where the venues have been, the areas where the cases, apply some common sense. And if you do know that you're one of those individuals that for essential work go to many different sites, please consider just getting tested.
Can I just ask a question? The reason for people wearing masks in apartment block common areas, was there something that led to that? Was there a transmission that led to that?
Well, there's an issue. Indoor apartment blocks, we have seen some transmission within, transmission when there's been multiple people. Now, how that transmission happened is often difficult because sometimes people actually say hello to each other or are social contacts. But what we're concerned about is doing everything we can possibly do to minimise transmission, and that includes the common areas. So that's been identified as a risk, when you're going up the lift in an indoor environment, when you're going through the apartment opening areas, and also it's making it clear that what we would prefer you to do, if you've got any shared spaces as well in those areas, really not congregating in the shared spaces that you might see as an extension of your residence. At this time, don't go to those shared spaces, and we've actually put in the mitigant of wearing a mask. So we just to say we're doing everything possible to look at how COVID could continue to be transmitted, but we have seen some cases within apartment buildings and this is one of the strategies we can use.
Premier, can I just ask a question?
At what point will you consider going further as more exposure sites come up and forcing businesses to close? And how much does that depend on how much support you're able to offer them?
Well, firstly, can I say how pleased we are at the community response, especially in the last 48 hours. And I'm confident that in due course we will see things turn around because of the community response. Can I thank everybody, both through police, mobility data and a whole range of other anecdotal information. People have responded, and obviously we need that to continue. So the quicker all of us respond to the message not to leave home unless we have to, and to have as minimal contact with those outside our household as possible, the quicker we can end this lockdown. And that is the strongest advice we have. The quicker all of us continue to do the right thing, the quicker we can get out of this lockdown. In terms of support, because we're not confident of what the end date of the lockdown is, please know the New South Wales Government is working hard to present additional support measures to the community, and we're also working with our federal colleagues to get a joint response and their support as well. So please know that as I say during this entire course of the pandemic, I don't want New South Wales citizens to stress unnecessarily about their predicament. Everybody's situation is different, but I don't think there's a single person in the state that isn't going through some level of stress, whether it's financial, whether it's just mental health, or a whole range of other issues. And please know that the support you need will be there, and we look forward to conveying that information in the next few days. But in the meantime, we just need everybody to stay at home, and I'm absolutely confident that we will get there, because we've done it before and everybody is responding to the strong messages we're sending. I think all of us, everybody has appreciated that we are in a critical phase. We can't afford to be complacent. We can't assume it won't happen to us or our families, and that message is definitely getting through. And I'm confident that we will see that turnaround, but we're not going to see it just yet, because what we're seeing now are cases that may have happened in the past, or the impact of cases that may have happened in the past, and we've got a lot of work to do to make sure that we continue to stop the spread more broadly into the community.
Premier, could I just ask, the NRL is meeting today to decide whether the competition moves out of New South Wales altogether, not just state of origin. What would your response be to that if it happens?
But I think at the moment it would be responsible for all organisations to limit any activity within New South Wales. Obviously, we're doing well in regional New South Wales, and we want that to stay that way. We don't want any risk imposed to our regions. Can I thank regional communities for the way in which they've responded, and touch wood, we've not seen any incursions or any cases in regional New South Wales, and we want to keep it that way. So I appreciate and respect decisions by organisations supporting New South Wales Health by not having those events in New South Wales at this time. Whilst our regions remain COVID-free, we want to keep it that way. We know how easily cases can spread throughout states, and it's a blessing for us that hasn't occurred yet in New South Wales, and want to keep it that way.
Premier, on business support, the Treasurer, Dominic Perrottet, will be presenting a package soon, but businesses still haven't got a cent out of the New South Wales Government out of the original package you announced at the end of June. Not a cent has gone to them, and that won't go to them until the 19th of July. Do you need to do more now to give business cash now, especially considering that we don't know when lockdown is going to end?
Can I say traditionally it would have taken months and months to get grants out the door, but through Service New South Wales we've managed to make sure that will be available to hit banks from the 19th of July. So we wanted to give businesses that notice of that date so they could plan ahead. So if they had to negotiate arrangements or speak to clients, they could at least say that they would be eligible for support from the 19th of July. So we wanted to provide that certainty. And whilst I know that for many smaller businesses cash flow is a challenge, at least that certainty ensures that they know what's coming from that date. And that's what we wanted to make sure. And we also have to be real. When you're helping literally businesses across the state, we will get thousands and thousands of applications. You need to make sure you can process them quickly, and that you can make sure you validate them legitimately as well. And that's why we gave that date, to make sure we had all the systems in place and that the money would hit the accounts as soon as possible.
$10,000 in hit the sides, though, for some businesses, Premier?
Well, look, it depends on the business and what they're doing, and obviously the time we announced that announcement, the lockdown was going to be a 2 or 3 week proposition, and what we will do is make sure that when we announce the additional support, we also cover every aspect, and unlike other states and other support measures, we've actually provided that support to every business across the state. You might be a regional business who doesn't have tourists this winter, or you might be a business in Greater Sydney that's subjected to the stay-home orders. So no matter what your situation, if you're in New South Wales and you've suffered, you will get that support. Thanks, everybody.